Thank you, Amanda, Joe, and Diane, and good morning and welcome to those of you who are joining us up online this morning. Well, we are at the third Sunday of Advent, and we've been talking about how Advent is this time of spiritual preparation for Christmas. Obviously, certainly it's the time of preparation for Christmas on the external too. We're out shopping, we're having lots of friends and fellowship coming across our plate, more activities to do. And it's a wonderful time of connecting and being with friends and family. But it's also a time where we experience kind of what I'm going to call that rub, because the spiritual journey is all about one of silence and solitude. You know, all the songs that in the Christmas carols, many of them are about the silent night and the holy night. And yet, we are at the mall until the very last minute. And so we're not having much of a silent night because we're in a hurry to get where we need to go, to get things accomplished that we need to do. So Advent is kind of like an invitation by the church, and an Advent season, this liturgical, using one of those fancy words, the liturgical preparation for Christmas is very old. Do you realize that? In about the 5th century, people realized that as the church grew, and I'm talking about the universal Christian church, I'm not just talking about Roman Catholicism, that kind of comes a little later down the pike, but they said, if we're going to experience Christmas, we have to kind of set the stage. We have to do something inside of ourselves to prepare. Back in the old days, remember you used to kneel and fast, and there was a lot of things that you had to do in order to spiritually prepare. But as time has gone on, of course, we don't quite prepare quite that way anymore. But it is an invitation to embrace the night and the darkness of soul, to look for that light in the times when we have a little, to carve out, if you will, a little semblance of quiet so that we can truly experience a new birth, a new life, a new awareness. And it's really about that awareness that we've been talking about. Somehow, in order to have a spiritual awakening, we have to be aware of it. We have to be aware that we have a spiritual nature. There are people, and I respect their opinion, but they're like, when it's over, it's over. There's nothing left. There's nothing more. And here's what I want to say. I don't care what happens afterwards. I care what happens now. God is an eternal present moment now. Whatever happens after, how can I judge? Haven't been there, and I'm not in a hurry to go. So, but the reality is, it's this moment. It's this birth, it's this Christmas, it's this December the 15th, it's this moment. So what is this birth all about? I think our Advent candles up here on our wreath on the altar behind us kind of tell us the journey. The first candle we lit that very first Sunday was about faith and hope and belief. The second candle was peace. And the third candle is love, today's candle. So what is that journey of birth? First and foremost, the belief that we do have a spiritual nature. That is a quantum jump for us. Because especially when we are in our younger years, when we're very busy getting things, having things, doing things, we may or may not have had a religious tradition to grow up by. And what I think is most interesting is most people who grew up in XYZ religious tradition have to rebel against it. You just have to. Because that's what you were told as a child, and now you're an adult. You don't need that anymore. I had to do it, and I can bet you if we raised hands, almost every one of you at some point in time said, I don't believe that anymore, I'm going to seek it out for myself. Because somehow, even though the theology and the maybe the tone and the tenor of the church no longer spoke to your heart, God still spoke. Somewhere in the middle, although you were struggling to find it, God still spoke. And we talked on that very first Sunday of Advent how that speaking is becoming like a little child. And all too often, we tend to kind of negate that, oh, I don't want to become like a little child. How about if we use another word? This is a word that came up for me this week. Contemplation. To become like a little child is to become still, engaged. Now think of a child, and they've never been in a mud puddle before. You can all get this image. And they're like so fascinated. And they're looking around to see if anybody's going to notice when they jump in this puddle, because that's why puddles were invented. And so the child is completely absorbed, doesn't know what's going on around. I want to jump on this puddle. And it's all about the moment and the excitement. And it's just focused. Well, what is contemplation? See, unfortunately, we have this idea that meditation is sitting in a chair, and we're not moving, we're not breathing, we're not doing anything. But really, contemplation is about focus. Contemplation is about presence. We're going to be present to this moment that we are sitting here and engaging in something deep within us that we don't really understand, we're not really aware of. And as we talked last week, Joyce Rupp invited us to see that, yes, we're born once as a physical reality, but in reality, we are constantly spiritually born. Over and over and over again, we come to the place of birth. We come to this place of new life because we listen, we hear, something in the middle sits there and calls to us. And with childlike simplicity and awareness, we are so intense and focused on it. But you know another thing, child is all about discovery and surprise and wonder. And that's the way our spiritual life should be. It shouldn't be like, oh, I've got to go to church today, or, I've done penance and all these other kinds of things that, we were all raised with. Rather, we should say, I get to experience my spirituality right now. Right now. Not next Sunday. Don't hold off until next Sunday. Right now. Right now, the miracle of your body is working. Right now, the miracle of your soul is healing, opening. Right now, what are you waiting for? It's a present moment experience. So when we become like a little child, we become focused and intentional in this moment. We have the faith and we have the hope that each new birth is but a new awakening to what is already there. See, that's what's I struggle with, we all struggle with, the realization that God is already here. I'm not waiting for God to show up. I'm waiting for me to show up. And I struggle with that in times when things don't go my way, when things are different and difficult. So what happened is we see this ancient story. So Mary is sitting there and she's waiting. And she's in this really kind of contemplative. Of course, we have much art that shows Mary, looking for angels and stuff. But really, if the truth were be told, Mary is sitting there Googling. And she is Googling the perfect Christmas dinner. And she says, oh, waffles and ham for breakfast. Oh, no ham, we're Jewish. Got to go back over that. And then she said, well, we'll have a little turkey stuffing. Yeah. Oh, that'll be great. We'll have the grandkids. And then she sits back. She's got the whole menu made. And she goes, ever felt that feeling? When you got something done and you go, the breath of spirit. There's something about that peace that is a consent. Do you ever think about that? When you come to that place of peace and you go, you have a sense of completion, of closure, of balance. Even your breath is the same way. You take an inhale, you take an exhale, but science tells us there's a moment of balance between. Science tells us that our heart beats in the same way. It lubs and it dubs, but in between the two, there's a moment where it pauses. It's the consent to take the next breath. It's the consent to beat again. It's the consent to whatever your spiritual journey and awakening is all about. Mary sat there and the angel said, Mary, would you? She had no clue what this angel was talking about, my friends. You must understand that. She had no clue. She had no frame of reference for what they were talking about. And yet, she knew in her soul, with wonder, with awe, with surprise and amazement, yes, peace. And so our second candle invites us on the birth process to come to those places of peace, to be aware of those places, because they're fleeting, aren't they? When you take that breath out, you don't just stand there for an hour and go, I think I'm going to take a breath in. No, you kind of go, right away, right away. So when Mary is encountering this angel, it's a right away experience, and yet at the very same time, there's that moment. She questions, she ponders, and we do too. We hear something on our soul that touches us. We know the rightness of it because we believe and affirm that this is a new birth within us. But we have that moment of peace where we go, let me say it a different way. Sometimes we often say, this is mine to do. Have you ever said that? You have a struggle or something, or you feel called to help a person or something, and you're walking along, you're not even paying any attention, then all of a sudden you go, this is mine to do. I'll walk over and I'll help you open the car door because you have all these packages in your hand, or I will do something for you. This is these little tiny births. See, the birth of the Christ is little. It's ongoing. It's daily. And so when we don't take the Advent opportunity to sort of fine-tune our skills as to how the birth happens, then we're not aware of how it happens day in and day out. So faith and belief, peace, and then love. So I pondered about this because all this whole month we've been talking about this idea of discovery, of surprise, but we've also talked about expectancy. Part of the reason Mary could not really grasp the magnitude of what the angel was saying to her, and part of the reason the whole Jewish world could not grasp it, is because there was an expectation that the Messiah king would look like a warrior, like David. And you have to remember that the people of Mary's time, which was around the year 4 BC, around that time, they were captive people. They'd been captive people. They were going to be captive people until 1948. And so we see that this longing for freedom, but the assumption that freedom had to come like it did before, held them captive in their own expectation. And I've pondered about that. Because you see, what happened for the Jews is they finally let go of that expectation after the third time they were defeated. Once in 3 BCE, once in 70 when they destroyed the temple, and once in 135 with Simon Bar Kokhba. And never again, folks, it is a Christian overlay that the Jews are waiting for a Messiah. In 135, they were done. The expectation was shattered. This idea that we expect Christmas, we expect Spirit, we expect our awakening to be something like this, our prayers answered like this. I got to thinking about that this week. It's been an insight, and I'm grappling with it because it's one of those sermons that's not done, because I felt like I'm on the tip of learning something, growing to my own personal growth, but I still haven't quite got the whole nugget yet. So stay tuned. What I realized is I always thought you had to let go of the expectation. I have an expectation that Christmas is going to be wonderful this year. I have an expectation that, I'm going to get a new Mercedes-Benz this year. I have an expectation that, whatever it is, I have an expectation spiritually. But is expectation the problem? And what came to me was yesterday. We live in Oklahoma. We understand Oklahoma weather. We know that when we look out the door and there's a beautiful bright sun, like yesterday, remember? Beautiful blue sky. And it is December the 14th, we open the door, it could be 30 degrees. And we know that in May it could be 70. But it's interesting how many of you don't go out with a coat until you're absolutely freezing. Because you think, you look out the door, and this is what happened to me yesterday. I was standing here in the church, and somebody said, would you hold the door while I go to my car? Sure. And I walked up, blue sky, lots of sun. I walked out the door, and I went, why am I out here without a coat? It is freezing. And I will do that until about January 15th. And then when it comes to May, I will be out there with a coat, thinking it's 80 degrees. What are you doing out here with a coat? So there's nothing wrong with the expectation, right? I have an expectation based on the facts around me. You and I all have an expectation. Expectations aren't bad. They're just expectations. So I thought, okay, if I'm not getting rid of my expectation, if that's not the core problem, what's the core problem? What keeps me from seeing my spiritual birth? What keeps me from being in an Advent time? What keeps me from knowing a greater depth of spirit during this time? And then all of a sudden, I thought, it's my grip on the expectation. It's not the expectation. It's I won't let the expectation go. I have an expectation it's going to be a fabulous Christmas. And anything that's not, I can't handle it. And I chafe against it, and I get angry, and I get frustrated. And I want the Christmas to be perfect like I've got it in my mind. And it can never be perfect because I've absolutely crushed it to death. So how is this birth going to happen? So as I was sitting there pondering, I thought, you know what? This is the essence of love. I can't change expectations on that level. I can't even let go of my grip on the expectation. What I have to do is love the grip. I have to love the grip. And all of a sudden, I got it. It's like, I understand now that this grip is what's keeping the expectation. It's this grip that is keeping the life from happening. It is this grip that is so tight and just has absolutely given no life to this expectation, no matter what it could turn out to be, that the answer isn't to say, oh, I can just say, oh, it doesn't matter to me, as I have done in the past. Rather, I have to say, how can I love the grip? How can I love the fact that I've just so desperately, so painfully want it to look like this? I've got to love the grip. And as I was thinking about that, I thought, well, what is love? We're not talking about a feeling here. We're talking about the essence of life. What is love if it's not nurturing? What is love if it's not healing? What is love if it's not freeing? You see, some of those expectations we have, people are going to hurt us. People aren't going to treat us well. Some of those expectations are it has to be perfect and right. Some of those expectations are it's better than this, it's worse than that. All of those expectations, we try to deal with the level of expectation, and expectation isn't the problem, because you know what? I've got an expectation we'll have a hot cup of coffee in the fellowship hall as soon as we get out of church. The expectations just go on and on and on. But the problem is I grip some of them, and I hang on to them, and I can't let them go. There was a friend of mine one time, but in my ministry in California, and he was a bodybuilder. Whew, girlfriends, easy on the eyes. Anyway, be that as it may. When he would hold my hand at the peace song, I thought that he was going to crush my hand, because he did not get how strong he was. And I always, during the peace song, I'd be like, "Ooh, can I step away from him so he won't grab my hand?" And inevitably, of course, he moved right next to me, and he'd grab my hand, and he'd smile, and he'd just take my hand, and I could just feel it go crunch. And I know and I would say, Tom, my hand. "Oh, yeah, sorry. No, let go of my hand." And I thought to myself, that image came up for me yesterday when I was thinking of this grip. How many times have you had someone grip your hand? And man, it hurts. And they're not intending to hurt you, but they're just stronger than you. And your grip on your expectations is just like that. It's a lot stronger than you think. And what happens when someone grabs your hand and they have it in sort of this grip, you can't get free. You can't move it. You can't flex it. All you can do is say, "Stop, please get off of my hand. Let me go." And yet our inner expectations about what it means to be a God-like being, what it means to be birthing a new awareness, what does it mean to have our prayers answered, what does it mean to grow and expand in spirit? You see, all of those expectations that we have a grip on them. Some of the grip is lighter than others, but for the most part, we've got a pretty strong grip on it. And there's no way that God can get in and birth anything because we've literally crushed it. We've literally crushed it. So it seems to me that our job this week, as we light the candle of love, as we move toward opening our soul and our heart to wonder, to mystery, to surprise, to let go of expectancy, isn't as much about letting go of expectancy as it is about loving what keeps the expectancy away. You see, our grip on that expectancy will never allow it to live. And so what I would like you to do this week, and I've started to play with it in my journal this morning, and saying, I have this image of Tom and holding my hand. Think about a time when someone has grabbed your hand, unintentionally, just shake your hand or whatever, and they're very much stronger than you. And they have held your hand in that grip, like, "Hi, it's really nice to meet you." Let go of my hand. And if that is, it comes up, doesn't it? Because you kind of go, "Let go of my hand. This really hurts. Let go of my hand." If that's true in a human interaction, then what must it be like in a spiritual interaction? How many times have I held on with a grip tighter than life itself to an expectation, and I've done it over and over and over again, and then I say, "God, where are you? God, why don't you, have more being in my life? Why don't I feel more spiritual? Why do I feel disconnected?" And God's like, "I'm not at Starbucks. I'm right here." The problem is you have so gripped down that expectancy that the love can't get through. That the love, the healing balm, that which loosens the grip, which nourishes the hand, which opens the heart, which allows for the birth, can't be let go. So our task for this week, our Advent task, is as we head into the birth story next week, the literal, physical birth story of Jesus, lived out in the stories of our own life and our own spiritual awakening. Maybe it would be good for us to give some thought as to how we crush expectations. God is not withholding things from you, friends. God is not sitting up there like Santa, making a list and checking it twice. We are putting a barrier between the loving flow of God, the birthing nature of spirit, we are the ones holding the flow at bay out of fear, out of control, out of power, out of whatever. But it's not until we let love heal that we will truly be born anew. Thank you for joining me today, and God bless.